Okay, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to the results webinar of the Home Waste Audit. This was a community science project and we host it every year. We're so excited to see what the last few weeks were like for everyone. And over this time, you took a deep dive into your waste bins. So what we're going to do tonight is to take a deep dive into the data that you shared back with us. We're also going to share some of your survey results and ask you just a few more questions about your experience. I'm Susan. Again, to reintroduce myself, I'm joined again by Chelsea to lead you through tonight's webinar. And I lead our volunteer and community programming. And as you can see from my fun fact, one of the things that I'm passionate about is jigsaw puzzles. And in addition to the process of putting them together, I really like the ability to swap them with friends when I'm done. And I'll turn it over to Chelsea to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chelsea Rockman, and I'll be helping lead some of this webinar, telling you about the data that you collected and what it all means. I'm a program lead for the U of T Trash Team of Scientific Programming and Application, and my fun fact is that I'm heading to Rwanda on Sunday to sample plastic pollution from the rivers. So I'm a little nervous and overwhelmed, but pretty excited, and hopefully I'll have everything I need packed and ready.
And so before we continue, it's important that we recognize the history of the lands we call home. And we're thrilled to have people joining us from all over and extend our acknowledgements to the Indigenous and traditional past across all territories. For our team, we're speaking to the land on which the University of Toronto operates within Toronto. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're so grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And so for tonight's webinar, as a reminder what the objectives were from the Home Waste Audit was to simply learn about your local waste streams, and in doing this, find ways to decrease your waste footprint as you work to divert waste from landfills through various changes, perhaps to the products that you're procuring and purchasing. And in tonight's webinar, what we're going to do is we're going to take a closer look and explore your data to share more about any reported differences in waste management, have a really close look at what you shared on in the surveys on your behaviors through waste management and literacy. And last but not least, have a close look at your self-reported waste habits over the last 2 weeks. So what were those items in the bin? And as a reminder, we will have a Q&A at the end. But if you have questions throughout, you can type those in the chat. And we'll try to answer them as we go. If not, if we don't get to them, we will save them until the end. And we'll cover the instructions for Q&A when we get there. We'll turn it over to Chelsea now, and she's going to walk us through a little bit about our overall waste management results and another recap on plastic pollution overall.
Thanks, Susan. Okay, so here we go. So to put everything in context, last time we met, we talked a lot about plastic pollution to provide some background. So just as a reminder, we estimate that about 23 million tons of plastic waste enter our oceans, our rivers, and our lakes every year. And that if we continue business as usual, this could increase to up to 90 million tons by 2030. Plastic is a persistent pollutant. It degrades slowly and it accumulates in the environment. So once it's in there, breaks down over time into more and more microplastics, and we tend to find those when we go out sampling. And finally, plastic pollution, including microplastics, threatens wildlife through ingestion, chemical contaminants, and also organisms can be entangled in our large items of debris. And we also talked about the different ways we can solve the problem of plastic pollution. And this audit focused mostly on those first two ways, which is reducing consumption and waste management. So within these, there are many diverse ways to reduce our consumption and our waste. So first, we can reduce the materials we use by reducing consumption and reusing. Second, when we use materials destined to become waste, we can choose ones that fall into more sustainable waste management bins, so not necessarily those that will go into the landfill. So it's better if waste can be sent to recycling or to compost, trying to keep it truly in a circular economy. And so to do this, it's really important that we understand our waste stream. So as the first step in survey 2, we asked you to learn more about the management of the waste locally where you live. We did this for 2 reasons. One, we wanted to increase your waste literacy if you didn't know it before. So we recognize that for some of you, this may have been a review, but I can tell you for myself, it never hurts to review. And second, we wanted to be able to show the combined diversity of our waste streams. Basically, how diverse were these answers across the different places where you live, all the different participants in this waste audit. Now, in this waste audit, particularly, a lot of people were from Toronto, and I'll show you that in a second. But we've had years where we have people really from different places across North America and even sometimes the world. And so before I sort of show you kind of the harmonization of waste management, meaning like what things can you recycle where? Do people have recycling? Do they have landfill? I wanted to ask if anyone can type in the chat their thoughts on why it's important to know about your waste management and why understanding your waste streams may actually help reduce the amount of waste we send to the landfill. So how can that information help us reduce waste? You can type it in the chat. Wait another second. I think this question often, if I'm being interviewed by the media and I get asked this question of kind of what can people do? Of course, we can write letters to our politicians. Of course, we can do our own cleanup. But I do think understanding our waste stream is important. So I've got a couple answers. So the first one is from Karen, who says we can recycle as much as possible or prevent buying what can't be recycled, right? So if we know what can be recycled in our city, we can make purchases that help us put less in our landfill and more in our recycle or less in total. Richard says you can't control what you don't measure. That's what's eye-opening about this exercise. Thanks, Richard. I like that answer. And Beth says if it ends up in the wrong stream, it can wreck processing equipment. And that's true, right? So you have this thing that I think we talked about last time called wish cycling. Sometimes we would just want to put everything in there and hope it gets recycled. But sometimes often it won't because it gets taken out so that it doesn't harm the equipment. And Brent says, today was waste collection day, and during my walk, it's clear that many people don't separate materials correctly. That's right. I think there is a statistic in the city of the percent of our recycling that is contaminated. And I don't remember what it is for home waste, but I know for like the bins on the city streets and parks, it's anywhere from 25 to 75%. We had a student measuring it this summer. So yes, recycling right is important. And that waste literacy is key because a lot of people aren't aware. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone. So here is a map of where we were. As I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of us in the Toronto area in Ontario, but we did have someone from Bowmanville, and we also had someone way up here in the Yukon, which is awesome. So this year was a little bit unique in that most people were in the same place. But like I said, we had a couple people from different cities. So when I show you our waste management here, you're going to see that our waste is fairly harmonized because many of us are in the same city. And for this first answer, I would say that we weren't surprised to see what we saw. So here you can see who had pickup for landfill at their house, who had recycling pickup at their house, who had organic waste, meaning that green bin at their house. And then also if anyone had anything, excuse me, just sneeze. I didn't end up sneezing. That was a little different. And somebody said that they had plastic bag recycling at Home Depot. So here you can see that everybody had a bin that is curbside for landfill. And then here you can see that almost everybody had organic waste and recyclable waste, all but one person. And then like I said, up here, we had this one unique thing here. And so here, pretty harmonized. But you can see, if you think about it, waste is really different around the world. In the years where we had a much more diverse pool and we had people who were even from overseas, this was during COVID when people were more excited, I think, to be doing different workshops and things on their computer. We managed to get people from all over the world. And we saw that not everyone even had curbside. So imagine how that kind of barrier to recycling if you have to go drop it off somewhere else, which is true for one person here. Then we asked this question of how does your city provide guidance on how to separate your recycling waste? So product type, meaning if it tells you an egg carton, a plastic bag, a pop can, etc. The other is if it's a material type, if they just tell you aluminum, or for plastic, for example, they say like numbers 1 and 2, which are those chasing arrows codes. And number 1 stands for polyethylene terephthalate, which is used for water bottles. Number 2 is HDPE, used for often like shampoo bottles and other types of things. And then, so we asked people mostly about here, and then yellow would be if you weren't sure, you maybe couldn't find that information. And the red is if they list the items that can be placed in the green and the blue bins, which sometimes you will have this like really specific. And so here you can see most people are by product type, which is the way it is in Toronto. And some people are by material type. This actually does kind of surprise us because we know where people are. And we looked up Bowmanville, which is in the region of Durham. So I think most of us are here. So I'm not sure what this material type is here. And I also, before we go into kind of what everyone said in terms of these specific items to show you, I want to show you what is recyclable here in Toronto, again, because most of our people who submitted data did happen to be in the city of Toronto. So if you go to the Toronto Waste Wizard, or if you go to the Toronto website, you will find that black plastic is not recyclable. That plastic bags, so stretchy plastic material, including bread bags, including grocery bags, are recyclable. Well, and actually, let me just rephrase this. Many of these things are recyclable technically, but it means we are supposed to put them into our bin, and the city of Toronto has a market for it. So they should be sending it out for recycling based on the information we find on the Waste Wizard. So styrofoam containers are noted as recyclable. Straws are not supposed to be put in the blue bin. They're supposed to go in the landfill bin. And cutlery is supposed to go in the recycling. This is different, again, in other places. So I believe in Durham, this can go in recycling. And I believe this would go in the landfill. Before I move on, does anyone know why black plastic doesn't go in the recycling? Maybe we went over this in the last one and I don't remember. Is it that it can't be recycled, or is it something else? Yeah, so Beth says no market for it, which is a great guess, but actually it has to do with going back to that equipment that recycling facilities have. So Richard said it's that the conveyor belts are black themselves and they can't detect it, which is true if they're using photos and using machine learning. And the second is that it can't be detected by the laser if they're using a laser like spectroscopy for the material. If you had humans sorting, black plastic could be fine. And in fact, because black plastic mixed with other black plastic just makes black plastic, it's actually really recyclable because they don't have to worry about mixing all these different colors and getting like a brown material or some color they don't want, which is why a lot of times durable black plastic is made out of recycled items because it's easy to make recycled things into a black material. So yes, this has to do with our recycling, the mechanics of our recycling. So, okay, so here's the data we received, where in this case, 3 out of the 16 people said they can recycle the black plastic, which surprised me. In Durham, you can, so that should have been 1 person. I'm not sure why there were a few more. It could be that some people know that there are containers within the city of Toronto that you can bring the containers to and recycle them, not at your home, but somewhere else. And similarly, we have some of these other different numbers. So I just wanted to ask people so that I can know why we're seeing this. I'm curious where people went for information. Was it the AI at the top of the Google? Was it the Waste Wizard? Was it the Toronto website? And I guess I'm curious because this is the first year we've seen a discrepancy, and I'm wondering if it's AI at like the top of the Google if you just type it in what you get. So Julie says she used the Waste Wizard. The Waste Wizard would give you, if you're in Toronto, the same information we got. And I noticed Durham has a tool as well. I'm curious, did anyone use a chatbot, like going to ChatGPT or the AI at the top of the Google? Which is totally okay if you did, because it's pretty normal these days, but I'm curious what the discrepancy is this year. I don't see any answers. But I will say that I do think that this lack of waste harmonization and the lack of knowing an easy place to go leads to some confusion, which leads to a lot of that contamination that I think it was Richard that said that he sees on the street when walking. And so the province right now, at least of Ontario, is trying to harmonize across our province. And I think eventually the whole country of Canada is trying to harmonize federally, which would be really helpful. And then we can all share recycling markets. So awesome. Okay. All right, so then moving on to the survey results, I'm going to turn this back over to Susan. And I see that Leah said the Waste Wizard is a bit confusing on plastic bags. Yeah, this is true. The Waste Wizard also can be a little bit confusing. So to be honest, it's all a little bit confusing. We always talk about the waste to make it easier. Okay, so Susan, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was just thinking about the use of the Waste Wizard, and one thing each city has kind of different ways of making the platform. And I know one thing with the Waste Wizard, which you're kind of alluding to, Leah, is they kind of have the words in as they are. So unless you type it in the way it's in the system, sometimes you might not find the exact item that you're looking for as well. So there's always, areas where it can be open to a little bit of interpretation, but our hope is the more we are looking up where things go and where we live, the better we're able to understand those subtleties. Which brings us to what one of our most exciting findings that we have every year. And you can go to the next slide, Chelsea. And as that is the majority of participants, in this case, 70% learn something new through the process. And that really is the goal for us, is to learn. No matter how informed you are, there's always more ways that you can build upon that knowledge. And so this process of learning was through tracking your waste and also taking a closer look at the waste guidelines we were just discussing, as well as completing the surveys. We'll go to the next slide and take a little bit more of a closer look at from what you learned. So this is a snippet. We didn't share everyone's things, but just some that stood out. A number of comments reported that just got better clarity on what belongs in what bin, and specifically what's truly recyclable. Clearly, there's still areas where that can be even more clear, but a number of people did report that, that light bulb went off. Oh, this belongs there. And then building on that, we have these yellow bubbles that here show that some of the waste sorting examples were new to ones that they didn't know previously. One that we'd like to highlight, in the city of Toronto, they started last year a new pilot for coffee cups. And we used to talk extensively about how they're actually not recyclable because of the plastic lining. But now they have a pilot to be able to manage this waste. And not everyone knows that change has happened. Of course, we're still encouraging reusable options whenever possible, but it is nice to see this progress. And then I'll move on to the last. Is in blue, we have examples of some items that participants noted the bin was different from what they assumed. For one example, a number of individuals learned that tissues can go in their organics bin. So before we get more into depth of this, what we're going to do now is we're going to shift to a Mentimeter. So I'll give everyone a second to get set up. Chelsea has put a link in the chat that you can use that link directly to open it up on your phone or another browser tab. You can scan the QR code, or you can do it the manual way and go to menti.com and type in the 98399933 code. And to preface what the questions that we're going to be asking, so you can start thinking as we get set up, is we'd love to hear from you what your easiest change to make was in terms of reducing waste, what the most difficult thing was. So maybe it was something you really wanted to do, but you haven't been able to manage how to do that yet. So what the easy things were to do, what some of the barriers, challenges were, and then growing from that, were there any waste reduction tips that you wanted to share? So I'm going to ask Chelsea to stop sharing the screen if everyone is logged in, and if anyone's having issues getting to the Mentimeter, let me know. But what I need to do is get the Mentimeter actually shared. So just give me a second to deal with my technology. Okay, so if I can just get a quick, maybe a thumbs up in the chat box that they can see the question okay. From someone. Okay, I see Chelsea's thumbs up on the screen. So, and I can see the answers filling in. So we'll let this populate for a few minutes and maybe read over some of them, and then we'll move on to question number 2. So I have this on my other screen, so I'm just gonna look to the side and read over these. Yeah, so that's great to know. Just it can be as easy as putting the thing in the other bin. That's really great to know. And that makes a huge difference as we talked about limiting recycling. So that was a very, by learning more, it was very easy for you to just adapt that new behavior. Throwing tissues in the green bin, great. And even if you didn't make that considerable change, becoming much more conscious is something to be really, to take pride in. Um, and I'm just reading a few other individuals that um, they were already kind of doing all the changes they were anticipating, so there weren't any to build on, and that's great. Um, how to make something recyclable. So let me read this. Cleaning some containers and add recycling it. Right. So maybe I don't know if that is specific to this example, but peanut butter is a classic example. If you just finish your peanut butter and threw that in the bin, that's going to contaminate it. But if you rinse it out and clean it, then it can become properly recycled. So that's a great thing to remember, not just what's recyclable, but what condition should it go in the bin. Um, some things require a lid on it, some things you don't put the lid on it. So it is really important to pay attention to those regulations. Um, no real change awareness, that's great. Checking which materials can go into the blue bin and green bin. Okay, now I'm going to move on to find out what can be recycled to the, sorry, I just saw another question before I was about to move on. What can be recycled to the organic and landfill bin and adapt? Yeah, so a lot of things about taking your knowledge and integrating it in terms of the actual sorting was quite straightforward. So I'm going to shift to the next question, and you might still be able to add to this one, but we're going to flip it now towards what were some of the barriers or changes that you found a little bit more difficult to make that you wanted to incorporate based on what you learned. And as you can see from the first one, all of these answers are anonymous, so you can feel free to to share these challenges that you faced, and there's no shame in any of it. It's something that we are all working towards. So hopefully it's flipped to the next question. You should be able to start typing into the next screen. Okay, great. Thanks for confirming, because I see the presentation mode. I don't see the other, what you see. As people are, something that I've personally experienced, if this helps jog your mind a little bit, is packaging can be something that is, finding, you want the item, but you can't find it in the packaging that you're looking for. Food packaging waste, exactly what I was saying, much difficult to reduce. Fishing something, oh, okay. So physically getting something out of the bin if you put it in the wrong one, that's interesting. Just taking time, not necessarily that it was challenging, but just remembering to be more mindful. Convenience, yeah. Using tissues instead of reusable cloth, yeah. So getting over that, there's so many things out there that are meant to make our life more convenient in that short interim moment, but just thinking, extending past that use of those single-use items, it does start to create issues later on. Using less paper towel, yep, those are very handy to have. Reducing plastic packaging, barbecue, buying things with less. So a few things in here about what I was kind of remarking about packaging as well. It's possible to get a few more responses, but I'm now going to go to the third question, which is, what are some waste reduction tips you have? So whether these were new ones that you learned or those that you already had, we'd love to hear from you and learn from you, and maybe some of your tips can help with some of those challenges people shared on the previous question. And this is the last of our questions before we go back to the results. I also do invite, as you are answering these questions, if there's if there's a question that comes up from this, you can save those for the Q&A at the end, because that would be great to continue this conversation on in that discussion portion. Okay. So the first tip is a great one. It's a reuse tip. So, and this is an example of bags of, since they are recyclable here, reusing them as much as you can until you ultimately recycle them. So that can be true of many other items that are recyclable, of finding those ways to continue to use it in another way. This is a great one. And we actually have a project relating to produce bags, is looking to use those reusable ones rather than the plastic ones that you find in stores. Using a reusable container for Tim's drinks. Yeah, so some reusables is definitely a nice common theme. Making sure things are clean, which was piggybacking off what was on the previous slide. Having a very small rubbish bin. So that's interesting. I used to be in an office where they had a big recycling bin by your desk that had a tiny little cubby on top for your trash. And that was supposed to incentivize you not to have as much trash at your desk, because you'd have to get up and go to the larger bin to throw it out. I'd forgotten about that until reading your tips, so thank you for that. So using reusable things can make things even more fun and personal. Bring a reusable bag wherever you go, and you can extend that to cutlery sets. You can buy these reusable cutlery sets. You could even make your own reusable cutlery set by having cutlery from home and putting it in a fun container that you carry around with you, or getting cutlery from the thrift store that you make into a kit. Purchasing something with, so looking for things with less packaging, which is also a challenge, but making that effort to continue to try to find those. Um, and one thing I would add is if you do start to find these items, is to tell your friends where to procure these materials that are better so that other people know about them as well. We don't want to keep all these great environmental tips as secrets to ourselves. We want to share them with everyone. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that. We are going to now turn it back over to Chelsea for what we're all probably here for, is to learn a little bit more about what we found in our bins.
Okay. All right. So hopefully you can see a screen that says waste audit data. And so now I'm going to share the actual synthesis of the data that you reported relevant to what you threw away during week 1 and during week 2. So we can actually see how did we do? Did we think we were throwing away what we were throwing away? And did we actually see a reduction in waste? So the first question is, what did we perceive in the beginning? So we asked you this question of how many items of trash, landfill, and recycling does your household produce in 1 week? And 51.1%, or most people, thought that they threw away anywhere between 0 and 50 items in their bin. And then as you can see the split for how many people thought 50 to 100, 101 to 150, and just over 10% actually thought they threw away over 150 items. So what did we really do? So here you can see that this over 150 items was pretty spot on. And actually, 40% of us throw away 51 to 100 items, and only 27% between 0 and 50. This happens every single year, and including the very first year when we all did our own waste, is we all underestimate often the amount of waste that we throw away. Not everybody, but it's hard to think about, counting every single time you throw it in the bin. So it's kind of hard to guess what that number is. Here you can just see kind of the diversity in waste habits across homes. So every letter in this case is a household. The average number of waste items in week 1 is here, with landfill in gray and recycling in blue. And you can see that there's wide distribution of variability, as you might expect. And you can see that sometimes there's more recycling and other times there's more landfill. And there's not like a clear trend. It's just that everybody's different, as you would expect. Okay, so let's start by thinking about whether or not we saw a reduction. And I'll start by one broken down by material type. And then later I'll show you kind of the drum roll, please, of the overall. So first we'll look at our landfill waste. And here you can see the different materials in different colors. So you have week 1 on the left, week 2 on the right, the average number of waste items across everybody's synthesized data. And you can see that the most common items in landfill is plastic, with paper second and mixed materials being, second actually in week 1 and third in week 2. And you can see here that for a lot of items, we actually did have a decrease, but we did have an increase in week 1 in paper. And that could be from maybe a switch from throwing away plastic to throwing away paper. I'm not really sure. So overall looks like here, maybe we will see a decrease. And if you think, oh, I should have asked you to guess this, but what are the most common items that we see in our landfill waste is soft plastic packaging. And I think someone had mentioned earlier that it's kind of confusing in the Waste Wizard because it's hard to think about what is soft plastic versus hard plastic. The way I think of it is if I can stretch it and it doesn't tear or just not break, then it is not soft plastic. But that soft plastic packaging here is the most common, some of which can be recycled. Lots of dental floss, which can't be recycled, plastic bags, sticker, hard plastic packaging. Next thing I'm going to show you is mixed materials. So what were the different types of mixed materials in our landfill waste? And this is week 1. So plastic foil wrappers and packaging. This is like snack wrappers, granola bar wrappers, chip bags, those things that sometimes is a mix of aluminum and plastic, sometimes is all plastic. Cigarette butts, which is a mixed material. Remember, it has that cellulose acetate plastic filter with paper wrapped around it. Cotton swabs we see every year. Wax papers, maybe we had some people who like to bake, and wet wipes, which can be a mixed material or can be completely plastic. And often the packaging doesn't tell you. So it's great that we see it here in wipes. Okay, so that's our landfill waste. So let's see how we did for our recycling. Now for our recycling, our goal could be to reduce it if we're reducing all of our material, but it could also be to increase it if we're moving items from our landfill waste over to our recycling waste. So we never quite know where we're going to land, and sometimes we land with a straight line and no change. And here you can see we actually ended up what looks to be decreased, but we'll see when we look overall, where we had less paper in our recycle bin and less plastic in our recycle bin over time, and pretty similar here for glass. And so when it comes to the type of items that we had in our recycle bin, in week 1, the most common item was tissues. And I think somebody mentioned that they were surprised to learn that tissues can go in the green bin. So some of those tissues might have been yours. In our recycle bin, then we have paper, packaging and wrappers, paper towels, receipts, and cardboard boxes. And then the next one I'll show you will be your most common plastic items in your recycling waste. Hard plastic packaging, which could be like a hard plastic cereal bag if we're thinking about it as the stretchy versus non-stretchy, but often I think people might refer to it as soft. But you have your hard plastic packaging, your soft plastic packaging, takeout drink cups and lids. No huge surprise, but nice that these can now go in the recycle bin. Plastic bags and drink bottles. All right, so the next slide will be the overall. So in looking at this, you're probably going to guess that we did see a decrease. And we did see a decrease. So congratulations. I think some of you in Susan's poll suggested that maybe you didn't make a lot of change. Well, we clearly had people making some change over this week, even if it doesn't feel like a lot. Every piece, excuse me, makes a difference. So here you can see the overall results with week 1 on the left, week 2 on the right. This is 15 participating households. This is the average number of waste broken down by landfill, recycling, and total. So that yellow line here. And here you can see we certainly actually are seeing a reduction. Excuse me, I'm allergic to this room. And so the average amount of waste items produced per household was 61 items in both landfill and recycling waste. You can see they're lining up pretty equally. By week 2, this decreased to 52 items in the landfill waste and 53 items in the recycling. So very similar. And so overall, we had a reduction by average of 17 items across all of our households. So like I said, you may feel like that's not a big deal. It is a big deal. If we were to scale up everybody in this home waste audit, we continue to decrease by 17 items. We maintain this over an entire year for all of us. All of us, 15, would reduce 13,260 items in a year. Now that's a lot. So imagine if you reduced even more than that, or maybe more importantly, if everybody in our community or our city or our province, etc., scaled up. So with everybody doing a little bit, we can actually make a really big difference. And so I think that is a really important message to state. And that's actually one of the things we really believe in with the U of T trash team. One of our slogans is every piece counts, because really we are all empowered. We can do something, and that can go a long way. So that is our data. So hopefully we can keep up these patterns as we move on from our waste audit. And so in summary, I'm going to pass it over to Susan to talk about what we saw, and then how we can continue.
Yeah, so we've covered a lot of information today. And so these are some of the main takeaways. And the first was that, as we shared, it was 70%. Most of us learned something new. And even if you already knew quite a bit, you've probably still learned something without even realizing. And what our hope is that you can share that knowledge onward and continue to use and build off of that. We also found that most participants underestimated their weekly waste, and we often see that, so that's completely normal. And one main thing is we recognize in this and in many things in life, change takes time. This was only in 2 weeks, and Chelsea just shared a really great stat about the reduction of how we could carry that over. In fact, in a single week, we still reduced an average of 17 items. So just think of that impact, that landfill slide, if we kept that up, and even still, if we encourage others to do the same. So we'll shift to the next slide just to say congrats. You are now officially home waste literacy experts. And so we hope you enjoyed that experience. We will be sending a recap email with this recording, as well as a link to download the certificate so that you can proudly display this accomplishment with your friends and get some bragging rights about what you've accomplished. And on to the next one. And just to say that waste reduction doesn't end here. If you hadn't already responded in our social media, we do have waste reduction tips. These are also on our website. And so we hope that you continue these as well as other ones you found online beyond our organization with others, because the whole goal is this shared knowledge. And so before we wrap up, we'll now transition to our Q&A. So before we get started, a reminder, you'll be able to ask questions in the chat out loud. We'll try to alternate between both. And if you do want to ask the question out loud, there should be a raise hand feature. We'll keep an eye out for that, and then we'll let you know when it's your turn to unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll go back and forth with the chat box. So I will leave that there and now open it up if anyone had any questions or other observations that they wanted to share, even if it wasn't a specific question. Always that wait for the first person to be brave to ask the question. So we'll give you some time.
Karen, good question. So the first question is how to reduce plastic floss. Is there a recyclable floss? I'm not sure there's a recyclable floss, but there is a non-plastic floss, which is like, I have to be honest with you, I don't use it. But it's a like a cotton or hemp, I'm not sure what the fiber is, and they have wax around it. And in my teeth, I can't manage to get it back out once I get it in, because the glides for a reason, but it's because it's plastic with PFOS. So floss is a really tricky one to do the right thing. Some type of reusable floss would be really nice. I know that sounds gross, but I feel like someone needs to invent that.
But we do find in our cleanups, we find a lot of those single-use flossers, so you can know that you're still doing that step up above using this.
That's right.
It's still a single use, but there's less plastic than the
That's
floss.
right. We find so many flossers in our cash traps every year. The plastic ones, yeah.
Yeah. Brent shares that it's been using a water flossing tool, and that's been doing great. So that's also an option. Talk to your dentist, of course. We're not here to give you tooth advice. It's important to floss, is all we'll say. But yes, that is a challenging item for sure.
Yeah. I need to get a water flosser. I am glad that I was just reminded of that. This is very popular right now. I think dentists do really like that.
Yeah. So that's great.
Any other comments or questions or things people want to share? I think, this was a really good group. It's really nice to see so many people submit their data and come back interested in the second webinar to see the data and also to see the change everyone made, which is really awesome. Okay, another question from Beth. Do you know if black paper frozen food containers that are lined with wax is recyclable? Black paper. So
So you're basically
I don't know if I know the answer.
I think it's like I'm just thinking like taking the color out of it. If there's a paper container with a wax lining, whether or not it's frozen, it's likely, like, I think it offers that. This is something like even us, we're like, got to check that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you say that was likely compost, Susan?
I was going to think landfill probably because of the wax,
okay.
But maybe not. It might. So this is where it gets complicated. This was similar with the paper coffee cup, is that technically it was always recyclable, but the vast amount that they would receive is not something that economically they could recycle. So it's just something to double check. It might be recyclable, but I honestly am not sure. And in that case, I don't know with the black plastic if there's a sorting issue or not.
Yeah, very to look that one up.
Yeah.
Leah has a question. Is it worse to put something in recycling when it is not recyclable, or the other way around? It is worse to put something in the recycling that is not recyclable. Or the other way around, you mean to put something recyclable in the landfill? Good question. I think if the system works the way it should, the thing you didn't recycle would just go in the landfill. But I hear rumors that sometimes if there's too much contamination in the recycling bin, meaning a few items that would go to landfill, sometimes the whole bin would go to landfill. So I think it's worse to put the wrong thing in the recycle bin. We were just talking about before this, it'd be really nice to get someone from Green for Life to come and do the Q&A at the end, because I feel like, or just somebody who's a waste hauler, because I feel like there's so much confusion when it comes to recycling. One time
Certainly,
we
yeah.
did get to talk to someone and it was really eye-opening, but I felt like even she didn't have all the answers. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
There's a lot of
it's better
nuance when
not
it
to
comes
wish
to waste.
cycle.
Great question. Thank you for asking this. Got us
Yeah.
thinking a lot. Um, and as we're thinking of questions too, if there was a result that stood out to you that you didn't expect, it's nice to hear that as well. Just making sure I didn't miss any raised hands. Okay, we're good.
So I think everyone's an expert now.
Yeah. I'm just sharing.
Brent has a question. I lived in Calgary, or a comment. I lived in Calgary for a short time. The collection people refused to take bins that had the incorrect material in them. See, I like that. I think we did a test like that in Toronto for a bit, where they would look at them, and then if you had something wrong, they would put a note on it and push your bin back up. And it was more of a pilot, but they didn't keep doing it.
Hmm.
And so I think in different cities, like I was just in Seattle helping my mom move, and they will not take your litter if it's wrong. Um,
It might still be the case. I went to the University actually of Guelph when I was a student, and it was like that. If we put something wrong, we'd get a big yellow sticker, and the trash bag would still be sitting out there, and then we'd have a week to think about what we'd done and correct it for the next week. So it was quite effective.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the one thing the city of Toronto does that is nice is you pay more for a larger bin when it's your black bin, your landfill bin. But maybe we could also have kind of that stick on paying more for our waste, although I'm not sure we want that, but it could help us reduce. Okay.
Okay, well, maybe we'll go to the next slide and start to wrap up them and say our actual goodbyes, but this is not a final goodbye. You can always stay in touch with us, and we hope that you do. So if you're in the area and you want to join us in person at events, the best way to find out about those is if you go to our website, you can sign up for our public newsletter. You can follow our social media. We don't have it up on our website yet, but we are going to be doing a cleanup for plastic pellets at Kazimierzewski Park on May 10th, which is a Saturday. So you're getting some first promo for it. It's still very secretive on the inside, but we will have all sorts of events coming up, and we hope to see you there. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming tonight, and we hope that you enjoyed your experience. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.